Hello everyone, my name is Macy Turner and today I will be talking about controversial historical monuments and whether or not we should destroy, archive, or keep these monuments on display. So what's the problem? Across the United States, monuments are being vandalized and destroyed due to political unrest, largely caused by the Black Lives Matter movement. According to The Guardian, some of the monuments being targeted include a statue of Robert E. Lee, a memorial to Confederate soldiers, a slave auctioning block, a statue of a Civil War admiral, and many more. According to this list of monuments, you can start to understand why they are being targeted for removal. These monuments are typically associated with racist historical figures or events. The monuments often depict figures that have a history of participating in and supporting slavery and have an overall reputation of racism. So what is happening to these monuments? Controversial monuments are being harshly vandalized by protesters. According to the New York Times, protesters dumped paint on the statue of Leopold II and even set it on fire. The arson of this statue shows how violent these protests can get, and it requires historians and city officials full attention. Well, what do we do with these statues? Oftentimes, monuments are so harshly vandalized that they cannot be preserved, thus they are removed and disposed of. But there is a debate surrounding what to do with these monuments that are in good condition. According to the New York Times, Guido Gracile struggled with this question when he was brought statues of King Leopold II. Mr. Gracile is the director of the Africa Museum in Belgium, and the statues were brought to him after their removal. He claimed that he could accept a few and maybe turn them into contemporary art, but if he were to accept the 300 to 400 statues of the king that exist, then his museum would turn into a sort of monument cemetery. The same thing could be said about statues in the United States. One would assume the proper place for a historical monument is within a museum, but how do you remove, relocate, and preserve monuments without altering the mission of a museum or creating a whole new, controversial museum? Recently, a statue of Theodore Roosevelt was removed from the entrance of the Natural History Museum in New York City. This is an interesting case, being that some controversial statues are being relocated to museums, yet this one was removed from a museum. According to the New York Times, the statue was removed because Theodore Roosevelt was considered a taker. He took land from natives and freedom from slaves. The statue depicts Roosevelt with two male figures riding next to him. One is a black person and the other is a Native American. Any viewer who is uneducated on Roosevelt past may not bat an eye at this sculpture, but to anyone else the racist tones are quite obvious. So what are my thoughts? The statue of Roosevelt is interesting to me because it was located at a museum. Personally, I do believe that these controversial statues should be relocated to museums because despite their reputations, they are still important historical works. Yet I also believe that the removal of the statue of Roosevelt was justified because of its straightforward racist tones and its prominent placing at the museum. The statue depicts two minorities that Roosevelt was known to disrespect, and the statue is placed right at the entrance and could deter guests from the museum. I think if the statue was in a smaller corner of the museum, it likely would have not been removed. The possible overcrowding of these statues in museums is a tricky one, but I think I might have a solution. I think that these statues should be treated more like art. There are thousands of paintings that depict slavery, rape, war, and other controversial topics, yet they are hung proudly in museums and sold for millions of dollars to buyers. So what makes statues any different? I think that these statues should be held by museums or sold at an auction, and the proceeds could go to a charitable organization. I think that is a solution that would make most people happy. Thank you for watching, and here are my sources.